The world we experience, this world, isn't real, and I can prove it to you. Here is an ordinary glass of water, and this is a normal pencil, but watch. Where the pencil goes into the water, it looks bent. What you see, what you experience when you look at it, is a bent pencil. But in reality, the pencil isn't bent, it's straight. Look. So here's an example of something that you see which isn't real. The bent pencil is an illusion. In reality, there is no bent pencil. The pencil in water example shows that some of the things we see are illusions. And these illusions aren't confined to just dreams or the occasional hallucination. Some of them are just the normal way things appear. It's normal to experience an illusion when looking at a stick in water. Now, this example obviously doesn't show that the entire world we experience is an illusion. It only shows that some bits of it are. But this is hugely significant because it demonstrates that there's a difference between the way things appear and the way things are. A difference between appearance and reality. Now, once this is admitted, a gap opens up between the world that we experience, this world, and the world as it really is. And once that happens, two natural questions arise. What parts of our experience are real? And how do we know? Now, these are deep philosophical questions, and ones that have demonstrated time and again just how difficult they are to answer. The stick in water case is pondered by the ancient Greeks, and many great minds since then that have pondered these issues have found the real world becomes cast off into an abyss of complete ignorance, sometimes never to return. Whatever reality is, it is thought, it can't be anything like the world that we experience. Now, you may think I'm being melodramatic. You may think that science provides a systematic way to distinguish what is real from what merely appears. Perhaps, but I think not. And demonstrating this is going to take more than a glass of water and a pencil. If you step outside and look around, what do you see? I mean, what do you actually see? Not buildings, not trees, not cars or roads, not directly anyway. What you directly see is colours, shapes and sizes. And if you close your eyes and focus on the sounds you hear, again, you don't hear traffic or birds or children playing, you hear pitch, volume and tone. These raw sensations that we directly experience, philosophers call qualities or qualia. They are the basic ingredients of human experience. Objects of perception like cars, roads, trees and buildings are constructed from those qualities using concepts. It is our concept of a car that takes experiences we have of certain shapes, colours and sounds and represents them to us as something familiar. A car. But if we had suddenly been teleported here from the Stone Age, we wouldn't have the concept required to assemble those qualities into a representation of a car. So we wouldn't see a car at all. In this video, I'm not going to question the reality of objects like cars. That'll come in other videos. For now, I just want you to focus on the perceptual qualities of experience. Colours, shapes, and so forth. And I'm just going to assume it's fine to talk about things like cars as real objects. When we talk about qualities, we tend to talk about them as qualities of objects, not as qualities of our experience. We say things like, this car is red, or this tea is hot. But if we stop and ask ourselves whether the car really is red, or the tea really is hot, we might not be so sure. Certainly the car looks red, and my tea feels hot. But is that redness in the car itself, or is it just something I experience in my mind when I look at it? Similarly, is hotness a quality the tea has inside itself, or is it again just a sensation in my mind when I touch the cup? Now, I'm willing to bet that as long as you paid enough attention during your physics class, you would say that this car isn't really red. What happens is that we experience redness when we look at it because it reflects red light into our eyes that causes us to experience redness. What the car itself has is a certain kind of microstructure that means it reflects light from the red end of the light spectrum. And if you are going to be extra extra careful, you might say that red light isn't really red either. It's just light of a certain wavelength that we call red because it causes us to experience redness. Out there in the world, nothing has any colour at all. Not cars, not light, not anything. Because colour is just something that exists in our mind as a certain aspect of our experience. In reality, there are no colours. And you might also say something similar about my tea. My tea isn't really hot in itself. Heat is just something I experience in my mind when I touch it, because the atoms inside the tea are moving at a faster rate than those in my fingers. Strictly speaking, outside of minds, there's no such thing as heat. There's just atomic motion. And you might further say that reality itself is also silent, odourless and tasteless. There are no sounds outside of minds, just vibrations. There are no odours and tastes, just molecules of different structures. That would mean that this tea is not only not hot, it also doesn't have that alluring smell and freshly brewed taste that makes me want to drink it right now. But what about other qualities, like the shape of the car and the location of the tea? Are these real qualities? This time you might say, yes, the car really is car-shaped as it appears, and the tea really is on the table as it appears. But in that case, we have two different kinds of quality. Some of the qualities we experience, like colour and heat, aren't real. They're not out there at all, they're just in our mind. But other qualities like shape and location are real. They're not just in our mind, they're also how things really are. But how do we know? What makes us think there's a difference between some aspects of our experience and others? How can there be some things that we experience that are real and other things that we experience that are not real? And if we have no good answer to the question of how we know what is real and what is unreal, maybe we need to rethink everything. Maybe everything is real. Maybe everything is unreal. To answer these questions, and to see why we even thought there was a distinction between real and unreal experiences in the first place, we need to dive a little deeper into the past. The historic origin of the idea that some qualities are real and some are unreal is debated, but it is most famously associated with the English philosopher John Locke. Locke was the first philosopher to expound the idea, categorise the qualities, and make the case for the distinction. And he is also the first to give the two kinds of qualities specific names. He calls the qualities we experience that are really in objects the primary qualities, while the qualities we experience that are not really in objects he calls the secondary qualities. Locke's argument for the distinction between primary and secondary qualities, which I will shorten to the PSQ distinction from now on, appears in a work called An Essay Concerning Human Understanding, which he wrote in 1689. His reasons for explaining and defending the PSQ distinction were in part to justify a certain view of the world, one based on the emerging approach to scientific explanation pioneered by the early scientist Robert Boyle. Boyle thought that scientific explanations should be made purely in terms of particles of matter, their motion, and their interaction with each other. According to Locke, this explanatory approach is not just the best way to do science, it's also an approach that reflects the nature of reality. He thought the qualities of perception that science uses to explain things, qualities like size, shape, location, motion, etc., are the primary qualities, and only these are real. The rest of the qualities, he said, were secondary qualities and were not real. They are purely in our mind and should be explained in terms of the primary qualities. Okay, so it's important to get a clear grip on what are the implications of this view before we start to criticise it. According to the PSQ distinction, the primary qualities that we experience are very much like the qualities objects really have. If I were to look at this car and ask why, when I look at it, it appears car-shaped, the answer is because the car really is car-shaped. Similarly, if I were to ask why, when I look at the car, it appears to be in my hand, the answer is because the car really is in my hand. But with secondary qualities, it's meant to be different. It's not that the secondary qualities we experience are completely detached from reality, like dreams or hallucinations. The idea is still that there are real qualities in those objects that cause us to have those quality experiences. But in the case of secondary qualities, the causes of those experiences are completely unlike the experiences we have of them. Our experience of colour is caused by, say, light waves bouncing off the surface microstructure of objects. And microstructures of objects, it hardly needs saying, are nothing like colours. Similarly, our experience of heat is supposedly caused by the rapid motion of atoms. And again, rapid atomic movement is nothing like the sensation of heat that we feel. Rather, light waves, microstructures, and atomic motion are all like primary qualities. They involve only the qualities of size, shape, location, and motion. Let's stop and think about this for a moment. The understanding of reality we get from Locke is of an impoverished world, stripped of many of the qualities we are familiar with and experience. The unreal world of our mind is colourful, musical, warm, and tasty. But the real world out there is colourless, silent, bleak, and bland. Any real quality that there is one that we experience too. But we experience many more qualities than there are out there. These supposedly unreal qualities are somehow caused to arise in our mind when particles bounce off us in various ways, creating this vivid and aesthetic world of conscious experience. Lucky us. Now, it probably won't come as a surprise to you to hear that science has changed a bit since 1689. Scientists now regularly use purely theoretical properties when making their explanations, things like charge and spin that we don't directly experience. Because we don't experience these things, we have no idea what kinds of qualities they are in themselves. We can only understand them by metaphor according to the way they behave in our models. So when a scientist talks about things like spin, colour, or flavour of particles, they really have nothing to do with what we experience as spinning, colourful, or flavoured objects. But as far as our central idea is concerned, these developments in scientific theory make little difference to the primary qualities Locke took to be real. In 1689, motion and location were said to be real, absolute qualities of objects. When Albert Einstein came along, they became real, relative qualities of objects instead. But the central idea that they were real qualities was never questioned. Similarly, in 1689, size and shape were said to be maintained by the solidity of the objects concerned. When solidity was later replaced by notions involving electromagnetic fields, the size and shape of everyday objects we experience were still assumed to be real qualities of objects. Now, I'm going to philosophically attack Locke's idea very soon. But before I do, I just want to explain why the issue is a philosophical one and not a scientific one, and this is very important. I'm not attacking science, scientific knowledge, or the scientific method. That stuff is all great, I'm a fan, and more power to it. Besides, as a philosopher, I'd be outside my expertise if I were to weigh in on scientific concerns, just as scientists are outside their expertise when they try to do philosophy. The way you can tell the PSQ distinction is not a scientific issue is that you can do science whether or not you accept it as true. You don't need to believe the properties in your theory are parts of reality to be able to make use of them. In fact, one of the most famous interpretations of quantum mechanics is called the Copenhagen interpretation, one that the physicist Richard Feynman summed up as the view that scientists should just shut up and calculate. The irrelevance of the PSQ distinction to science becomes clear if you think about disciplines other than physics. You don't need to believe that desires are parts of reality to do psychology, or that numbers are parts of reality to do mathematics. You just need to be able to grasp the relevant concepts, engage in the methods of the discipline, and produce knowledge of the sort set by the discipline's standards. Since the PSQ distinction is irrelevant to science, it can be rejected without being unscientific. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's get back to the PSQ distinction. Now, Locke was a philosopher, and he was fully aware that what he was putting forward was a philosophical claim, and so he presents philosophical arguments for it. So, what are they, and are they any good? Well, here are the three main ones. Locke starts with an intuitive idea. He says that the qualities objects really have are those they have independently of the perceiver and independently of their context. Such independent qualities, he says, are primary qualities. Secondary qualities, meanwhile, don't have this kind of independence and so are not real. As an example, Locke considers a grain of wheat. When we look at the wheat, we experience it as having a certain shape, size, and position. And we continue to experience it as having these things even when it gets chopped up. Even to the point of when it's ground into flour, we still experience it as having a certain shape, size, and location. So Locke says that if we were to extrapolate this process to the point at which the wheat were no longer visible, some kind of wheat particle, we have to conceive it still as having a shape, size, and location. All the primary qualities, Locke wants to say, are maintained no matter how small we go. But he thinks it's different with secondary qualities. Consider colour. The wheat starts off as a kind of yellow, golden brown colour. As it's chopped, it starts to get bits of white, and by the time it gets to flour, it's completely white. Similarly, the wheat will start to change in terms of how it smells and how it tastes as it gets smaller and smaller. Because of this, Locke says that we can imagine wheat particles as being tasteless, odourless, and colourless, and that's what gives us good reason to think these are secondary qualities. Nice idea, but does Locke give us good enough philosophical reasons for thinking that there is a difference between primary and secondary qualities in terms of their independence? No. The problem is that when Locke talks about what he takes to be primary qualities, he talks about them in general terms: a size, a shape, a location. But when he talks about what he takes to be secondary qualities, he talks about them in particular terms: the colour brown, the colour white, and so forth. It's only because he has this bias built into his example that it seems to show what he wants it to show. When that bias is removed, the example doesn't show any kind of difference. Sure, when the wheat is still in its whole form, it will have a certain size, shape, and location. And even as it gets smaller and ground into flour, it will retain a certain size, shape, and location. But similarly, it will retain a certain colour too. It's coloured when it's in the wheat form and coloured when it's in the flour form, just as it has a certain smell and taste in both forms too. But if we start to talk about things in specific terms, its size and shape will change as it goes from being whole wheat into flour. Similarly, its colour changes from a kind of brown colour to a kind of white, and its taste and smell change in terms of how they particularly smell and taste. But so then, there doesn't seem to be any kind of difference here between the different kinds of qualities. All the qualities will change in terms of what particular quality they have, but none of those general qualities will appear or disappear throughout the process. And what about Locke's contention about what we can and can't conceive? Is it really true that I can imagine something colourless, but I can't imagine something without a shape? Well, I can't really imagine something colourless. The best I get is a kind of neutral grey. And to whatever degree I can think of something colourless, perhaps a ghost or a spirit, I can also conceive of it as being without shape and size too. So it really doesn't seem as though Locke has given us any reason to think there is a principal difference between the qualities in terms of their independence. Are there other ways to justify the PSQ distinction based on Locke's criterion of independence? Well, it seems there might be. After all, some people are born colourblind. Others aren't, so colour experiences are relative to the perceiver. Similarly, if the light changes hue, our colour experiences change too, so colour experience seems to also be relative to context. Since such qualities are so dependent on relative factors, according to our criterion, they can't be real. But primary qualities don't suffer from this same relativity. Since primary qualities don't vary in the way that secondary qualities do, we have good reason to think they are real. Does this line of reasoning help? Well, it seems that it falls into the same problem as the last argument, in that it switches between general qualities and specific qualities for it to work. Let's focus on general qualities first. It's clear that we all experience some colour when we look at things, even if we're colourblind or are surrounded by a strong blue light. What changes from person to person or context to context is only the specific colour that is experienced. The general quality of being coloured is therefore not sensitive to the perceiver or the context of perception. And if there is no light at all, or if we close our eyes to remove all colour experience, then it's not only colour that disappears, size and shape are not experienced either, and these are meant to be primary qualities. So these considerations fail to demonstrate a difference between primary and secondary qualities at the general level. Similarly, when it comes to specific qualities, there seems to be no difference of category here either. Sure, colour experiences will vary from person to person and context to context, but so will size and shape. Some people have conditions like macropsia, which mean they visually experience size and shape differently to others. And context affects size and shape too. If you stand up close to something, it will be experienced as bigger than if you are further away, while the shape you experience will depend on the angle from which you look at things. Again, no dice. Okay, so now let's move away from Locke's justification by a criterion of independence and see if there are some other grounds we can use to justify the distinction. Maybe we could draw on Aristotle and say that the real qualities are those that can be confirmed by more than one sense. Colour can only be seen, sound can only be heard, and odour can only be smelt. But things like size, shape and location can be both seen and felt. The idea here is that since these qualities are confirmed by more than one sense, we have more reason to think that they are real. But even if this argument were correct, would our added confidence really be justified? If I know that my eye is wrong when it sees colour, and my skin is wrong when it feels heat, why should I think both are suddenly right when they see and feel shape? Maybe having two witnesses that are known to lie is better than having only one, but surely not by much. And if this is the best we have, then we're really not in a very good place. And there are deeper problems with this argument too. Some qualities like sweetness can be both smelt and tasted. So according to this argument, sweetness should be a primary quality. But that seems wrong. Things like taste seem like obvious examples of secondary qualities, which is a problem. Another major problem for trying to use Aristotle to identify the primary qualities is that it would have to be the experienced felt or seen qualities that were the same. But this is highly doubtful for something like shape and size. Do we really have the same experience when we feel a cube as when we see one? Are they even similar enough to know that they are the same real quality? The philosopher William Molyneux suggested there was a thought experiment that could help answer this question. Suppose, he said, a person born blind regularly handled a cube and sphere of similar size, so that they could tell which was which by feeling them. Now imagine this person suddenly received the ability to see. The question is whether, when they first look at a cube and sphere but without being able to touch them, they would be able to determine which was which by associating the way they look with the way they had previously felt. If they could, then these experiences were similar enough to connect the way a cube looks with the way a cube feels. Well, until we have the ability to restore people's sight, it's hard to know. But both Molyneux and Locke agreed that the person wouldn't be able to know which was which purely by looking at them. They would first need to be able to touch the objects to associate the way they felt with the way they looked. In which case, there's a difference between the experience of looking cuboid and feeling cuboid. And so there is no more a common shape quality to objects than there is a common delight quality that exists between the blue-veined look, pungent odour and delicious taste of Stilton cheese. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with no philosophical justification for saying that some aspects of our experience are real and other aspects are not real. Philosophers that nevertheless want to maintain a reality distinction between aspects of experience tend to rely on physics and argue that its success at explaining the world to us somehow demonstrates it. The idea is that since physics can explain the secondary qualities in terms of the primary qualities, we have good reason to think that only the primary qualities are real, and that the secondary qualities are merely in the mind. But this is a mistake. It's an argument that would only be convincing to someone that has already bought into the idea that physics has some special connection with reality and can reveal its hidden nature to us. This is a bias of our age, one inherited partly from Locke, but it's a completely unjustified one and one we find very difficult to shake. Well, perhaps I can help you shake it off by raising the following 2 points. There is no reason to think that the order in which we explain things has anything to do with the reality of the things we are talking about. Psychologists, for example, explain behaviour in terms of psychological states, but it would be odd to conclude from this that our behaviour is less real than things like our desires or beliefs. In fact, since behaviours are movements of physical bodies and psychological states are in the mind, it seems the psychologist's explanations go in the opposite direction to those of the physicist. And when we turn to other factual disciplines like history or biology, we get different explanatory orders again. Do historical and evolutionary explanations suggest that the past is more real than the present? Clearly not. But these differences between disciplines are to be expected. Psychologists study mental causes, and so they try to explain other things in terms of those causes. Similarly, historians and evolutionary biologists explain the current state of things in terms of the past state of things. Physicists, on the other hand, try to explain things in terms of measurable phenomena. So it makes sense that they would explain things that can't be measured, like colour and sound, in terms of things that can, like frequency and wavelength. But so what? The order of explanation has much more to do with the nature of the discipline, its aims and objectives, than it does with what's real or not. Ah, you may say, but physics is different from these other disciplines, for physics explains everything. It reaches back to the very beginning of the universe, and all other facts are built upon it. Facts about cars and coffee are really just facts about particles, because everything is made of particles. This is why the truths of physics are the fundamental truths, the truths of reality. No, this thinking circles back once again to the bias of our age, so let me try once again to shake it off. Physics clearly doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the fall of Rome, why torturing babies is wrong, or why the Mona Lisa is a masterpiece. It doesn't even explain why the colour red looks the way it does when I perceive it. And this isn't because science hasn't yet discovered the answer to these things, it's because these are facts of a completely different kind. They are historical, moral, aesthetic and psychological facts, not physical ones. But physics is very good at explaining the streaks that appear in cloud chambers when particles collide at high speeds. These are physical facts, and when you want physical facts explained, it's right to turn to a physicist. Now, the only reason to further think that only the physical facts are the real ones is if you think that reality is entirely physical. And that's the same as to say that the only real facts are the physical facts. Can you see the circling thinking going on here? You can think that way if you like, but it's a philosophical assumption, and one that's completely unjustified by science. The theories of physics have now become increasingly abstract, governed primarily by mathematical modelling. So the original grip we had on what those qualities were via our experience of them has become increasingly different from what it is the physicists talk about. We experience space in 3 dimensions, and it was by our experience of space that we were meant to understand what things like shape, size and location were. But Einstein argued that space was curved. And he further said that time was actually a 4th dimension of space-time. Nowadays, physicists regularly talk about 10, 11, even 26 dimensions. The dimensions of space we experience are said to be only 3 of them. But if I am told that space is curved, or that time is like a distance, or that reality is 26-dimensional, not 3, I no longer have any experience of what it is you are talking about. In fact, if by space I understand this, then I'm not even sure what it means to say that space, i.e. this, is curved. These ideas only really make sense within their mathematical model, and so they should be understood first and foremost in terms of their mathematical formulation. If I am told that space is curved, then whatever I understand by space, it doesn't seem to be anything like the thing that I experience. So then, if qualities like size, shape and experience are real in the way that the physicists talk about them, perhaps as aspects of an object's 26-dimensional being, then they can't be anything like the qualities of size, shape and location that I experience. Once again, I'm left with the conviction that whatever reality is like, it must be completely unlike the experience that I have of it. And this time it's the physicists telling me that my world is unreal and not the philosophers. So let's assume I've managed to at least unsettle you a bit. If the world we experience is unreal, and if physics has no special insight into the nature of reality, must we just accept our fate? Must we accept that reality will be forever shrouded in the darkness of our ignorance? And are the postmodernists right when they say that all truths are relative and that knowledge is really a game of power? Not on your Nelly. The reason I want to unsettle you is to once again make space for a discipline that studies reality without any assumptions. And that discipline is called metaphysics, and is a core area of theoretical philosophy. Metaphysics asks questions like, what is causation? What is the nature of truth, and are we free? And it leaves every option open. Perhaps there is a God, perhaps not. Perhaps everything is physical, perhaps nothing is. Perhaps the world is governed by laws, or perhaps everything's just chaos. Instead of jumping in and asking about what exists, it stops and asks what it even means to exist in the first place. Metaphysics basically questions the ideas that most disciplines just take for granted. Unlike science, which has a set method, metaphysics has no prescribed method, nor does it limit its inquiry to facts of a certain sort. But that doesn't mean it's a complete free-for-all. It is, after all, a branch of philosophy, so it must approach things in a rigorous and rational way. Everything must still be justified, it's just that the terms of justification are not predetermined. They're left fuzzy around the edges. So here is a summary of the channel and why you should subscribe. Metaphysics used to be part of our public debate. Its views told us how we should think about the world and how we should live within it. But nowadays, metaphysics is almost completely forgotten and is more likely to be associated with kooky spirituality than it is with any serious discipline of philosophy. Nowadays, when we want answers to our problems, we turn not to deep thought or tradition, but to data, analysis and focus groups. We've become addicted to technical solutions to our problems, and this has even infected philosophy. But these technical solutions aren't working for us anymore, if they ever did. I believe passionately that metaphysics needs to get back into the game of explaining human experience. Because I don't know about you, but I think we need a serious rethink about who we are, where we're going, and what on earth is going on in this weird world. To do that properly, we're going to need to get out of our assumptions, to get a higher perspective where the air is clear, we can breathe deeply and think things afresh. In many of my videos, I'm going to take a metaphysical assumption and then philosophically examine it, and perhaps suggest alternative worldviews that I've drawn from the past and reinterpreted for our current cultural context. If that sounds interesting to you, then I invite you to join me on the journey by subscribing, and I also have a membership program you can check out too. I'll see you soon, but until the next time, keep thinking.